All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's introduce our panelists to the stage. First, we have Julie Yongchu Choi, CEO and founder of Kiora Ventures, followed by Darren Chiu, Regional Head of General Insurance Commercial Development at Toggle, a subsidiary of Open Plan Incorporated. Next, we have Gang Chern Sun, Program Director at K Startup Center Singapore. And last but not least, Jason Su, Chief Investment Officer of Farquhar Venture Capital. Julie, the floor is yours.
Okay, I think it's working. Wow, wanna turn up. Hello, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today. It is my great pleasure to invite you to this exciting panel discussion on Beyond the Borders startup scaling in and out of Korea. Let me start with a fact. I'm not so sure you know this, but according to the Startup Genome Report 2025, Seoul has surpassed Singapore to become the highest ranking in the startup ecosystem. This latest developments raise an important question. Does it mark a new shift in where the new innovation leadership in Asia will emerge? Big question mark. This is exactly we are here to explore perspectives from investor betting on the Korean startups and startup scaling across the borders and the government representative driving this movement. Joining us today, Farquhar VC, Open Plan, K Startup Center Singapore. Together, we'll unpack what drives the growing Korea startup corridor, and also how startups are scaling in and out of Korea, and how collaboration across the public and the private sector is shaping Asia's next wave of innovation. So before we begin, I would like to invite each of our panelists sitting next to me, brief introduce themselves per 1 minute. Okay, why don't we start with the Darren? Darren, please.
Yeah, sure. So, hi everyone. My name is Darren. So, I lead commercial development for Open Plan throughout Southeast Asia. So, Open Plan, we are an insurtech based in Korea, and we are now expanding in Southeast Asia. We are now in Singapore and Malaysia. So what I do building across Southeast Asia is I try to build bridges between Korea's deep tech and the high growth diversity throughout Southeast Asia. Yep.
Thank you, Darren. It's great to know how the Open Plan is bridging the Korea deep tech capabilities with the Southeast Asia insurance ecosystem. So next move on, Jason, please.
Hi, I'm Jason from Farquhar VC. We are a venture capital firm that invests in Southeast Asia, Taiwan, Japan, and importantly, Korea. What sets us apart from other VCs is really the fact that we've been advocating market access through the help and collaboration of small, medium enterprises in the market that we operate in. Prior to starting this venture capital firm, I was a lawyer and also in private equity. My first private equity deal was actually in Korea. It's a leverage buyout of BHC, the fried chicken chain, when I was in Citi. Yep, so...
Wow, thanks, Jason. It's what an exciting story that you have from the M&A low to VC investor, and also Korea fried chicken success story in the mix. Thank you. Chern-sun, now move on to you, please.
Hello, my name is Chern-sun. I'm from K Startup Center Singapore. Essentially, we're a government agency under the Korea SME and Startup Agency, or KOSME in short. So essentially, we foster international collaboration between South Korea and Southeast Asia. This includes supporting startups to scale internationally through cross-border market access, facilitating investment, as well as connecting our startups to potential business partners. Thank you for having me today. Glad to be here.
Johnson, thank you. It's so nice to have a government perspective presented here because we all know this is quite essential for Singapore and Korea for the startup ecosystem drive. Okay, I think I mentioned that before that according to the Genome Startup Report 2025, Seoul has climbed to number 1 in Asia. Ouch. Sorry to the Singaporean friends, but congratulations on my fellow Koreans. What do you think? It's a question to all of you. What do you think drove this rise? Seoul becoming the number 1 in an Asia startup ecosystem. And how do you see the Korea-Singapore dynamic evolving after this? Shall we start with the Chun-san, please?
Yes. So as I always say, it all depends on which ranking you go to. So it varies from ranking to ranking. But nonetheless, I think we are truly honored and delighted that Seoul has made it to the top 10. This is quite remarkable considering the fact that barely 5 years ago, Seoul was not even within the top 20, right? And I just like to add that, in my personal opinion, the Korean startup ecosystem is still fairly nascent. We have a lot of areas that we need to improve on, and we will continue to learn from many experience from other successful ecosystems. That includes Singapore, which has a very vibrant and thriving community here. Also to note, this recognition doesn't belong to us. I think it belongs to the community itself. Startups like OpenPlan or even investors have made this possible. And I think it was in the same report, the same Startup Geno report that mentioned this, that while many countries today are facing a liquidity crunch, right? There's a decline in investment capital. Korea actually bucks the trend. In fact, in 2024, we saw a year-on-year growth of 8.5% investment in our community. And we are seeing this growth and interest in our startups, not just from our local Korean investors, but increasingly, we're also seeing investors from abroad. They are now looking at Korean communities, including our panelists, Jason from Farquhar Ventures. To my knowledge, they have been actively hunting for startups in Korea. So again, the recognition belongs to the community who have all made this possible. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Chun-san. Jason, what do you think? Do you agree with the Chun-san?
Thank you very much for recognizing our effort. The lawyer in me needs to define Seoul a little. So Seoul, as we all know, is the capital city of South Korea, 9.6 million people. But more often than not, when we talk about Seoul, we refer to Seoul metropolitan area, which include Gyeonggi-do, Incheon, and a few other smaller cities. And this greater metropolitan area has 26 million people living in it and account for the bulk of Korean economic activities. So when we refer to Seoul, often we are referring to South Korea itself, right? And Seoul really embodies the heart and the soul of the nation of South Korea. So in this discussion, I'll use Seoul and South Korea interchangeably. So Seoul and Singapore follows the same trajectory of development. In the 1960s through the 1970s, we are industrializing quickly. In fact, in some areas, we are always competitors until recently. So for example, in shipbuilding, in electronics and semiconductors, we have been fierce competitors, fighting nail to nail with each other. However, Singapore has obviously lost out in these areas. We do not have the breadth and the depth of the economy of South Korea, which is much bigger. And the 1988 Olympics held by South Korea actually shows this. It showcased to the world the breadth and depth of and the talent of the Korean people, and Singapore can only be envious about it. We only have a small population, very small land mass. There's a limit as to how we can grow our economic base. There's a limit as to how much of a breadth we can cover, but I think we do have breadth. So, interestingly, you see that these two countries or these two cities have been fighting with each other for a long time, and it's unprecedented that in June, when the leaders of both countries announced that they're going to build this strategic partnership, In diplomatic terms, this is very, very big because that has never been declared, and now we have that, which means that we're going to collaborate a lot more in all areas, including technology, startups, etc. So, on this note, I think Singapore has recognized that there are things that we cannot compete anymore. But we have our own unique advantages, serving as the gateway for larger industrial nations to come and access the Southeast Asian market in an internationally recognized way because of the jurisdiction, the rule of law that we so-called have, and the commercial sort of environment that we have built up for ourselves.
Okay, thank you, Jason. Let's move on to the Darren. Let's hear from the Darren. What do you think?
Yeah. So I think two parts to the question, right? So one is that Seoul has overtaken Singapore and why that has happened, and two is that how do we see the relationship between both countries move forward? I think for the first part, I think like Director Yoon mentioned just now, I think the support from the South Korean government to startups has been exceptional. From the early 2000s, startups agencies like KSC, the grants given, so all this exceptional funding and support from the government that has helped startups. And then the second part of the question, I think, is the relationship between Singapore and Seoul. I think it's not so much a competition between both countries. I think it's more of how we collaborate. So Seoul or South Korea, interchangeably, they have the deep tech expertise, they have the R&D depth, etc. They have the innovation depth. But what Singapore provides is the commercial gateway to the rest of Southeast Asia. And I see the relationship is how they can collaborate on this journey. Yes.
Yeah, I think what everybody says is a sums up as what appears to me is that there isn't zero sum race. Seoul, Korea may lead in the R&D and technical depth, and while Singapore provides a gateway to Southeast Asia. Together, Singapore and Korea, we believe, they form a powerful partnership, and the cross-border collaboration has been essential key for both countries' ecosystem development. Now, let's move to the investor perspective, Jason. It appears that mood in the fundraising, everybody says winter is here, and the market remains cautious worldwide. So the global fundraising market is still seen as a winter. Like I said, what's your outlook for the next 12 and 18 months?
Okay, controversial comment from me. I apologize first. I think this so-called funding winter that we are going through right now, it lasts for a long time. If we were to pick up these defining characteristics of this winter, which is that VCs or investors are no longer investing the way we used to. We used to be a little more exuberant, a little more dreamy, investing into companies and forcing them to burn and grow quickly, gain market share, which sometimes are pretty meaningless if you cannot protect it. So I think the mindset has changed. And because of this mindset change, the commercial viability of the businesses that VCs and investors are looking at is taking center stage. So we're coming back to basic. At the end of the day, investment 101, we have to invest in things that can potentially make us money. If it's not even going to be commercially viable and defensible, how are we going to invest? So I believe the chew that a lot of the startups are facing in this so-called funding winter is due to the fact that they have been too used to the more dreamy, exuberant version of venture capital investment, and that has to be reset. And if the resetting is pain that they're all going through, I think this winter will last a long time. However, we see funding coming in the last 2 years. In fact, among portfolio companies, I think this year we see a lot more follow-on investments by many of the existing investors in our portfolio as compared to 2 years ago. And this trend will continue. Even ourselves, we are revving up to invest more in the next couple of years. So I think the winter, depending on how you see it, is here to stay. But there is money around, and I think funding is increasing again.
Thank you, Jason. That was a realistic yet encouraging comment. It is good to hear that the investment is returning in a more value-focused, driven way. So let's move on to the actual startup. So let's hear from the open plan that you recently closed a Series B across both Korea and Singapore, despite of the fundraising in the winter. What were the key factors behind your fundraising success in this challenging environment?
Yeah, so I agree with my fellow panelists there, Jason, right? Uh, what investors want to see these days is they wanted to see the clarity of vision, and they also want to see if the company is able to execute on what they want to do. So I think for us, what we really had to show our investors was traction, traction in terms of revenue streams, like clear revenue streams, traction in terms of partnerships, right? So we are in insurtech, we are in insurance. So our traction in terms of our side contracts, partnerships with insurance companies, and sign contracts with our B2B partners, and how we deliver the products to the market for B2C, embedded insurance, etc. So I think echoing what my fellow panelists say is really it's winter if you are not able to show what the investors want to see, which is traction, clear revenue streams, and clarity of vision. Yeah.
I know there are a lot of startups, Korean startups here to your tips. I'm sure that they'll help for them to prepare for the next fundraising with the global investors. So, Darren, if I may, another question to you. And looking back on your first year in Singapore, I'm sure there was a lot of ups and downs. What was the one thing that you would have done differently if you could go back?
Yeah, I think on hindsight, right, as a startup, because we are always moving really fast and you always pivot, right? So, but on hindsight, what I could do, especially in this market, is that I could look out for partnerships earlier, people that could really work with you, and leverage on government support as well. And because in this very diverse part of the world, it's really not about moving fast alone. It's really about moving far with the right partners. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're saying this that if you wanted to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, you need to go together. So that excellent insights, Darren. Thank you so much. And it's really highlights the speed isn't just about the moving fast. It's about the moving far together with the right partners. Okay, now moving on to I would like to ask all panelists. For a Korean startup to entering Singapore today, the first year is the most critical in determining the long-term success. What would you say is the best way for them to approach their initial 12 months to capture the maximum value from the Singapore market? And how can stronger collaboration between the public organization and the private players like investors, Jason, help accelerate their cross-border growth and create more supportive ecosystem for global expansion? This is a little bit too long questions. I hope that you remember. Can we start with the turns on, please? Yes.
I think Darren briefly mentioned, so one avenue that certainly you can tap on is the government support, since I'm from the government agency. So, and here at KSC, we provide a whole range of support for incoming startups. For instance, here in Singapore, we actually provide a landing pad for incoming Korean startups to soft land in Singapore. We also work with quite a number of the local partners to help these companies with their go-to-market. We had a great partnership with Julie as well as with Fakwa Ventures. And this is important, right, to work with the local partners because they not only bring the local knowledge and the nuances, but also the connections to help accelerate their go-to-market. But besides the Korean government, I just like to also share that the startups should also tap on the support from the Singapore government. The Singapore government is actually very supportive in welcoming and supporting the international startups. And across the various agencies, there are actually a range of support programs that you can actually tap on. Take for instance, Enterprise Singapore, which is the lead agency for supporting startups here. They are also the host of this amazing conference, right? And it provides such a great platform for companies to connect with regional players, investors, potential business opportunities. So yeah, certainly, again, to tap on the government support, both from Korea as well as Singapore. The only caution that I like to warn the startup is that you should never develop your go-to-market strategy based on a government incentive, because that's quite dangerous. Always start from your customer, and if there is a government program that complements your strategy, then take it as a bonus and not the other way around. Yeah.
Thank you, Chen-san. Jason, moving on to you as an investor perspective, what do you think?
Actually, there are many good points covered by Chen-san. I'll just go straight to this key factor that I think is affecting many startups today. The thing about being persevering. Many times you don't expect to come to Singapore and hit, the gold mine immediately. You need a bit of patience, talk to more people, and find the right kind of customers and supporters that can bring your business forward. The two portfolio companies that we have that are now also in Singapore took more than a year for sure to get their initial traction. But after they got the right partner, they entered the regional market very quickly. In fact, one of them now has presence in at least 5 Southeast Asian countries just through one single partner. So you really need to persevere. I'm not going to repeat the points that my friend here has covered. We provide a lot of support.
Okay, moving on to Darren. Do you want to add anything to this?
So just a short one. Chen-san mentioned, right? Don't enter the market because there's government support. So government can open the doors, but at the end of the day, you are the one that have to walk the path through it. So leverage them not just on the grants and all that, but also leverage them in terms of the network that they can provide and find the right partners in the market before you enter. Yes.
Okay, Darren, thank you. I would like to ask actually one more thing. Do you think the riskiest assumption Korean founders make when they're entering South Asia market? Can I repeat that? What's the most risky assumption Korean founders make when entering Southeast Asia market? Coming from they were doing a lot of good job and the good growth journey in Korea. They're coming to the Asia, and so what do you think is the most risky part? The assumptions they have. I think maybe we go with Jason.
I think most of my fellow panelists will share the same point, which is you do not assume Southeast Asia to be Singapore. Singapore is but one country in Southeast Asia. I can name you at least 50 to 60 different markets in Southeast Asia that each have its own unique characteristics. Although there are only 11 countries in Timor-Leste, 11 countries in Southeast Asia. So this is one of the biggest risks that I think South Korean startups, when entering into our market, face by assuming Singapore is Southeast Asia. It's a good base to enter Southeast Asia, but not Southeast Asia. And assuming that Singapore has a big enough market for you, that's also very risky. We are, after all, a much smaller market as compared to South Korea. But this place is like a nexus of business connection. You have to come here and make the most out of it to reach out to the rest of the region. So I think these are the two major risks that I think they face.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's Singapore. Every country in Southeast Asia is different. It's not like a one country. So Darren, what do you think? I think you could say a lot based on your experience.
Yeah, so I think from where I sit, helping OpenPlan, a Korean company, expand throughout Southeast Asia, is really understanding that every part of Southeast Asia is different. Every government is different. In fact, and it's sometimes I think the biggest risk is when you look at it in terms of or GDP or what metric you're looking at. Singapore looks to be a place whereby you can come in and make your goal, right? But it's a very small country as compared to the rest of Southeast Asia, like Indonesia or Philippines. But then again, when you go into those markets that are very big, you can be quite stretched because the asset values there is also small. So the risk is echoing what Jason said, is thinking that is homogeneous, like what South Korea is, but really is very different in every part of Southeast Asia, and every country or even every state needs a different strategy when you enter. And so your partners there, partners that understand the space, will be very important for a Korea founder who wants to go into Southeast Asia.
Yeah. I think Darren and Jason echoed what you were saying, is understanding each market is the key for the potential, the expansion to successful expansion to the country. Johnson, do you want to quickly add to this?
No, I think both analysts have already covered. And I don't think it's just limited to Korean startups coming into Singapore. I think it applies to any startups entering a new market. You should always learn the local market, and because it's never going to be the same from where you start with, right?
Okay, I think we're turning to the wrap up the session. Before we go to the last session, this is a second last questions. Let's end with some spicy, rapid fire, burning questions. The first one might get a bit spicy. If you had to, it's a question to all of you. If you had to bet on either Seoul or Singapore as the next unicorn factory of Asia in next 5 years, which city would you choose, and why? Shall we listen from Darren, please?
Which city will I choose? It's very tough, right? I work for a Korean firm and I'm a Singaporean. But if you look at it, I think both countries are doing very well. I think in fact we have kind of like the same number of unicorns, about 30 odd each. So it's hard to pick one as the winner. But where you see what Seoul or South Korea has is they really have the depth, they have the larger population, they have the innovation expertise. But what Singapore provides is the commercial gateway, right? What we have the regulatory clarity, we have the investors' money here. We provide the gateway to the rest of the connectivity to the rest of Southeast Asia or Asia. So I think the next winner or the next unicorn is one that leverages on both, right? Leverage on the innovation, the R&D depth, and then leverage Singapore for its gateway to the rest of Asia or Southeast Asia. Yeah.
Okay. Let's move to Jason. What do you think? You can be very candid.
I wanted to say Singapore because I'm from Singapore, of course, and I love my country. However, this is an unequivocal stand I have to make, which is South Korea stands a better chance simply because, like what Darren has said, the breadth and depth of the economic base is simply bigger, and then the industrial base is also there. There are many industries that we will only be able to dream about having unicorns. For example, semiconductor industry. We have a lost decade, of our own for semiconductor. When in the late 1990s, early 2000s, we gave up our semiconductor leadership in fabrication by selling away. So it's almost impossible to catch up in electronics, almost impossible to catch up in shipbuilding, almost impossible to catch up in biotech, despite A-Star having a lot of valiant efforts to commercialize great technology. South Korea simply have a bigger base. Yeah. So if you talk about more unicorns, absolute number, South Korea. But in Singapore, it's not all bleak, right? We do what we do best. Fintech, service industry related sort of startups will do well. Your platform plays will do well here. So yeah, that's my stand.
Okay, Jason, thank you so much for choosing Seoul is over Singapore. And the next turns out maybe a little bit tricky question for you, but let's hear what do you think.
So just to remind everybody, in case you have not been paying attention, I work for the Korean government. Korean government. So jokes aside, but I think I agree with what Darren mentioned. It doesn't have to be one or the other. In fact, I always believe there's great synergy to collab together. In the business world, I strongly believe 1 + 1 is more than 3. So we should work together between Singapore and Korea to develop the unicorn factory of Asia rather than choosing one.
Okay, very diplomatic.
I see
Okay, one.
daggers coming from my
I
colleagues
know
now.
your boss is looking at you. And so. Okay, so the final question to all of you is just a one sentence to convince the global startup founders. There are many out there. Why Korea should be their next stop? Why? What would that be? Just a very quick. Okay, let's start with Jason. Sorry.
Assessing state-of-the-art technology at a fraction of the cost everywhere else. What are you waiting for?
What are you waiting for? And Darren, what do you think?
I think speed of the innovation, R&D depth. What are you waiting for?
Okay, echoing what are you waiting for? And Chan-san, what do you think?
Yes, in Korean, I think it's called Pali Pali, right? Please hurry. So my colleague already mentioned Korea is aspiring to be a global startup hub. So we welcome anyone, innovators, investors, startups. Please come, Pali Pali.
Pali, what are you waiting for? So that is it. I would like to thank you so much for everyone joining us today. And also, big thank you to our distinguished panelists for sharing their candid, invaluable insight and perspectives. And if there is one takeaway from our panel discussion, I think this is a Korean startup, so no longer scaling out. They are scaling up to lead Asia's innovation story. The real question is, are you ready to pace with them? Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the Switch 2025. Thank you.